However, as soon as he saw me he quickly abandoned what he was doing, prepared an espresso and sat down with me, which made me feel very privileged. He told me that he had chosen that specific location to build a home for his family but also to offer shelter for the pilgrims. When I returned to the trail I remembered the advice that Juana had given me, to eliminate everything that took up space in my head and that distracted me from fully dedicating myself to the way. For me, titles and prizes weren't a source of pride, but rather they were acquired tools. I had realized that I had imposed a label upon myself and that adhering to that label had stopped me from fulfilling certain dreams. I had taken a digital book to read in the evenings and I had almost finished it. Nevertheless, I decided to postpone the reading. It's that I did not think it was necessary to carry objects in order to connect with the divinity, and what I truly needed was to delve deeply into my own story. My pilgrimage was not a typical holiday nor touristic adventure, it was more like a discovery of my superior being. I didn't hold on to anything for too long, besides the presence of myself. I remembered the teacher's lesson when he explained to his students what a teacher did: when he was eating, he ate, when he was sleeping, he slept, and that's why I decided to leave the book for another time. I spotted a container on the side of the road that was for clothing donations, and I used it to alleviate myself of some weight and to help people who might need some things. Beatrice has explained to me that one of the unwritten rules was to carry no more than 10% of your weight on your back. I felt like I was floating in the air without any commitments besides the commitment to understand myself, living in a dream that I could enjoy with my own eyes. What I would see when my eyes were opened was the same as what I would see when I closed my eyes and dreamt. Everything I wanted and everything I had were both right there in front of me. I felt lighter without as much weight in my backpack, without the weight of the warm clothes that I had never used but had taken just in case. My inner voice was pushing me to fully devote myself to the way, and I was positive that he would make sure that I had everything I needed. And that voice gave me relief and confidence. All my worries dissipated. The only thing that existed was the present moment, intensely and fully. The landscape looked like it had come straight out of a fairy tale. The sun shone brightly and stained the autumn countryside of the prairies with different shades of green, and the herds of sheep that were everywhere looked like constellations dispersed at random throughout the universe. Nearby there were vigorous and iridescent race horses that grazed in pairs. In my opinion, there were some advantages to walking the way during the month of October compared to other times of the year. For one thing, I didn't have to endure the suffocating heat that can make the hike more difficult, though not impossible. Additionally, I could enjoy the wonderful silence that came with completing the pilgrimage outside of the peak holiday time when most people choose the way as their touristic destination. So precisely for those two reasons I enjoyed the most favorable conditions for my self-discovery. In the distant haze of the Basque Mountains, I saw the outline of a person a few hundred meters ahead of me. I walked at a slower pace than that which I would in the city, and yet I was able to catch up to her at the next point of interest, a cross at the top of a hill. Her name was Michelle and there was something truly special about her. She was charming, had a youthful glow, big golden curls and honey-colored eyes that expressed innocence. Her voice was refined and angelic, and she spoke slowly while taking long pauses. Almost without realizing it and without discussing it, we started walking together. Deep in the forest of the Pyrenees, the air was thick and heavy with humidity. I felt like the air was approaching me and drowning me, like my body was suddenly experiencing a drastic change while it received this precious gift from nature. I could smell the damp grass and hear the sound of my footsteps on the fallen leaves. The plentiful signage along the narrow path surrounded by dense vegetation ensured that we had not lost our way. Suddenly we found ourselves stopped in front of a wild geranium that had an intense violet color to it. It was truly a wonder of nature, a sublime manifestation of the plant world. Then, aside from taking in the view, I began tuning into the smell. I was aware that the sense of smell, a hidden sense, was the most important one at that moment. Actually, it was the second most important one, because there was another sense, or feeling, that was even more buried, that was beginning to emerge, bit by bit. I took an apple from the apple tree in front of me and put it in my backpack. From the place where we were standing, high in the Pyrenees, the views had delighted us with snowy peaks all around, and with valleys of oak and beech forests, and when we descended we found ourselves in a lush landscape full of lichens, a true test of the amazing purity of the air we were breathing. At dusk the landscape changed completely. We couldn't see beyond a few meters in front of ourselves and the sun began to hide behind a thick grey curtain of fog. The temperature dropped considerably and we were surprised to encounter a soft rain. We found a refuge built out of stone that was a resting place for the pilgrims, and we stayed sheltered there for a while. I had time to enjoy the apple that the tree had given me. We found ourselves among other pilgrims in the refuge and we sat down with them exchanging complacent smiles for the beauty of that shelter that seemed to have come out of nowhere. Like on every path, the journey had to continue and our momentum and enthusiasm did not let any doubts or obstacles get in our way. When we crossed the monolith of Navarre, I realized that we had crossed over into Spain. It was interesting how the map showed me as being in a different country, but the landscape presented itself as being an entirely homogeneous whole. Our first night along the way was in Roncesvalles, about 30 kilometers from the portal of Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. There, I had a nice conversation with several pilgrims and I had the opportunity to find out why they had decided to make the pilgrimage. For some it was a test, to prove something to themselves. For others it was a touristic adventure, others did it on behalf of sick relatives, and for others it was a spiritual or religious quest. Everyone had noble reasons for walking the way. I realized that for whatever reason, we were all walking the same path, at different paces, and that we were all, more or less, having the same experience. The next morning I felt complete, even though I was a bit physically tired. While she painted a picture, Michelle gave me a small bandage for blisters that one would put on at the slightest indication that a blister was developing. She also told me that she was a dedicated painter. While we were crossing the Sorgenaritsaga forest, Michelle told me that in that area, in the past, they chased down heretics and that participants in these covens were done away with, suppressing their freedom of expression. All those who used ancestral wisdom or resorted to unconventional practices were considered to be disruptive of the order and consequently condemned by authority. She also told me that she believed that the present time was giving way to a new world in which that paradigm, that had been dragging on for so long, was beginning to fall apart. After several hours of walking, we arrived in Bergued and we came across a street vendor with a little truck full of all types of food. Fruit, vegetables, fresh bread, cookies, and honey were all lined up and available inside the truck. He also had everything ready to weigh and serve the food. As we waited for our turn, 2 pilgrims behind us were anxious to be attended. One of them looked at her watch and with a snarl of dissatisfaction she told her friend that they had a long way to go before reaching Zubiri and that they should continue walking so as not to lose any time. And so without further ado, they left without buying anything. I had previously witnessed situations like that one in the bustle of the city and unwittingly, I compared what had just happened to what I had seen in my daily life back home. The infinite stillness of the town and its people dissented the celerity of the pilgrims and their watches. I remembered how sometimes the monotony of routine life or a lack of awareness had stopped me from seeing beyond things, precisely because I was only concentrating on the end point. I had lost hours, days, weeks, and even years waiting for one thing or another to happen, thinking that that was how I would find the solution. And when I reached that point that I had been wanting to reach, I craved something new or I realized that that was not in fact what I was looking for. And of course, when I didn't reach my goal in the time frame that I had planned and in the way that I had wanted to, I would become frustrated and I would start to lose faith in myself. I would look at the goals as if they were reference points that I used to define myself if I achieved them. The achievements were like an earthly prize for my dedication, and I dedicated myself to responsibly dealing with every present real-life situation instead of all of the hypothetical future ones. And Michelle said, time is a material manifestation of the universe, it is part of our richness. An authentic tycoon of seconds of time uses this gift wisely for something productive. It takes only 11 days to become a millionaire of seconds and 30 years to become a billionaire of them. Every time I have to do something, I do it with the full conviction that the reward is in the act itself, moving away from activities that push me away from myself and moving towards activities that bring me closer to myself. When I am connected to the universe, time loses its physical entity. If the universe gives me a piece of land, I give thanks and I work it with love, and if it gives me money, I use it consciously. Everything is an expression of matter and energy, it rises and falls, rises and falls, rises and falls. And I realized that those words would hold enriching memories of that moment, those invaluable and unique moments like a dawn, a sunset, a full moon night, a mountain retreat, a dinner with my beloved, a shared moment with my loved ones, or the work that lit up my soul. And so I asked Michelle what she was doing to stay so inspired. I let life flow and I pay attention to the signs that come up, with neither resignation nor exigency. The Supreme is something invisible, and that something invisible moves everything. Everything emanates from the Supreme and the Supreme resides in all things. When I connect with Him, everything is perfect and I become a vehicle that transforms ideas into reality. What Michelle said reminded me of what Sister Juana had taught me before I left home. I had become involved with more and more people and had discovered mastery in all the people with whom I found myself. I had lost track of time during that conversation, but shortly after we continued walking. I was bewildered but once again grateful to have met Michelle. And I told myself that I wanted to build myself into a tycoon of my next 30 years of life. I had made myself a bucket list with 50 things to do in life before I died, and the way of St. James was not on that list. However, I knew it would not be a waste of time, beyond doing this or that. All of them involved living in the present moment while still fulfilling outstanding objectives. I was beginning again to write my own adventure. To travel, to love, to share, to dance, to sing, to enjoy with my family, to ditch an activity that enslaved me and to start another one that filled my soul with joy, to love without caring what the rules of society considered correct. 30 years were enough for action, silence, and many other things. I remembered Beatrice, with the way in front of her nose, who had dreamed of traveling on it for many years and that for different reasons had not been able to. And for that reason, I dedicated my trip to her that day. A pause along the way. After crossing an abundance of vegetation and several stone bridges over a crumbling river, we arrived, thanks to a recommendation, at a local hostel run by religious sisters and their collaborators. Usually the concept of sisters made me think of typical nuns with black habits that were somewhat removed from this world. However, the term sister was, in this case, synonymous with grandmothers. The place was as welcoming as the hospitality of its people. One of the sisters even offered me a hot bath. We sat at the table with the others to share a prayer and an abundant communal dinner that was distinguished and made with the love of a grandmother. It was exciting to see plates full of delicacies passed from hand to hand, then left on the table, and then once again passed around in no particular pattern, from one pilgrim to the next, all in an atmosphere of jubilation and gratification. After dinner, volunteer hosts invited us to ring the oldest bell tower in Navarre, and then they gathered us together with the host sisters in a prayer space in the chapel to express our gratitude. One of the sisters read aloud the blessedness of the pilgrimage, and she emphasized that we should be grateful to have a period of time in our lives open to complete the pilgrimage, and to also be grateful for those around us, since without the help of our neighbors we would not accomplish anything. Despite all the wisdom transmitted through the reading, the most special moment for me was when we were invited to perform an inner reflection, which satiated as much as the food we had eaten, which was also spiritual because it had been made with loving hands. It was a moment that allowed us to pause along the way, to slow down our bodies, to decant and refine our thoughts and to enjoy the peace and quiet of the place. Like all questions of internal reflection, the answer was within each pilgrim. I was aware that the atmosphere of peace in that place of worship increased exponentially by the collective power of intentions from everyone that had been brought together. Also, the fact that I put the ideas down in a manuscript and that we had the opportunity to share them verbally with the group generated a miraculous and enormous sense of commitment within all of us. Why are you walking the way? What have you discovered these days? What do you expect to find in him? I felt grateful for all the love that